Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Sabir, pronouns he, him, and I direct events here at the Strand. Before we launch into a discussion of Carol Leonnig's new book, Zero Fail, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until after 93 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third generation owner Nancy Bass Whiten. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers, authors such as Carol, and journalists such as Stephanie, we wouldn't be here today, and we are so truly appreciative of it. Tonight, we are thrilled to have with us Carol Leonnig for the launch of her new book, Zero Fail, The Rise and Fall of the Secret Service. Carol Leonnig is a national investigative reporter at the Washington Post, where she has worked since 2000. A three-time Pulitzer Prize winner and co-author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, A Very Stable Genius, Leonnig is also an on-air contributor to NBC News and MSNBC. She lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband and 2 children. Joining Carol in conversation tonight is Stephanie Ruhle. Stephanie anchors MSNBC's Stephanie Ruhle Reports on weekdays and appears across all NBC News and MSNBC platforms as NBC News Senior Business Correspondent. As a Wall Street veteran, Ruhle is known for bringing her business acumen and hard-hitting style to high-profile interviews, for her original reporting and bringing humanity into her news coverage, including her reporting on the migrant crisis at the border in McAllen, Texas, and her daily Good News Rules segment. Ruhle is also the host of the Modern Rules podcast. The show takes aim at zeitgeist topics with the goal of understanding and respecting ideas that conflict with our own. It is not meant to change our minds, just to open them and hopefully help us become better and smarter in the process. And so, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Carol and Stephanie to the stage.
Thank you so much. I'm Stephanie Ruhle. Thank you for having me. Carol, I am thrilled to be here with you tonight. You and I have been on stages together for some of your other amazing work. So it's a real special treat for me to be here with you today. For our audience, hopefully, maybe some have read Zero Fail. At the end of this, I know they're going to want to read it. You have been a phenomenally impressive journalist for many, many years. You've written about unbelievable things. Why this? Why the Secret Service? How did you come upon this?
Well, first off, Stephanie, it's an honor to have you be my questioner. I look up to you in many ways. I know you think that I'm so impressive, but watching you report on so many different things and bring them to life is amazing. So I know you're going to bring this to life as well. I'm excited to talk about it with you. It is weird. You hit on something that a lot of people don't. It's sort of, nobody has the beat in Washington of covering the Secret Service. I mean, the White House reporters really have for years looked at the Secret Service dudes as the kind of cranky, sunglass silent guys who get mad when they don't show up with their bags on time for Air Force One to leave a particular city. Nobody really covered them, but they had this bizarre, there's no way to put it nicely. They had this bizarre sex scandal in 2012, and it kind of sucked me into what I thought was going to be a big, weekender, essentially. Weekender meaning a story that you report on for 4 days and you have some big package at the end of it explaining what in the world happened in Cartagena, Colombia, when 12 agents got shipped home because they turned this presidential trip into a Vegas bachelor weekend full of booze and prostitutes. I thought that was it. I was going to dip in my toe into that, help report what the heck happened.
You were just going to dip into Cartagena, drugs, prostitutes, and booze, and just dip out. I got you, Carol. Dipping in.
The world of journalism, and you know it well, is one in which every week brings something completely new, and you're going to learn it quickly. You're going to become a Picasso overnight by paint by numbers, and you're going to write about it, and you're going to figure out all the details you possibly can. What Ben Bradley used to call, 90% of the truth. You're going to get at least 90%, and that's what I thought. Except along the way of meeting so many agents who genuinely and generally never talk to reporters, along the way meeting them, I realized they were breaking down in their barriers and talking to me and trusting me because they were really frightened. They were worried that the agency was really broken. And though they were dedicated to this zero fail mission, making sure the president didn't get killed, they thought he was going to be assassinated on their watch. And this was during President Obama. They really believed that. And that's what pulled me down into the vortex of their lives, and ultimately many years later led to this book.
But take us back, because you're talking to us. Talk to us as though we just landed from Mars. So what was it, right? You were covering this crazy scandal that sort of had to be covered, right? What took you from covering this scandal that, has all the elements of what make for a great news story, for a book, for a movie? How did you go from there to these agents who really thought we're going to have something's going to break here? Take us there.
Yeah.
Way too much.
So many of them I can't name because they would get fired, and some of them actually, sadly, did get fired for talking to me. So I don't name the agents, and I try to.
Fired for talking to you?
Yes.
How hard is that for you, Carol?
It's awful. I mean, I still remember the phone call from one of them. It's the worst thing that can happen to a reporter. The next worst thing is getting a mistake in a story that's serious, and it's a big mistake, or even a medium-sized mistake. That's the next worst thing. But to have somebody lose their job because they trusted you and were so upset and worried that they were going to break the rules to get this information out. I feel like sometimes I'm just channeling these people. But to your question, while I'm interviewing agents about this sex scandal in Cartagena, like, what the heck happened, guys? Why did Art Huntington, the counter assault agent, why did he not pay the prostitute? Why did you guys think you could go out and get hammered, bring women whose names you didn't know, whose identities you didn't know, back to your hotel room? What happened there? I mean, I was not getting to initially interview the people who were implicated. I was interviewing agents who were their friends, and they were like, "You've got it all wrong. We want to help you get it right." They did. But as these agents were helping me get it right, they were like, "This happens all the time. You guys don't realize in the press that this sort of bad boy behavior on the road is a regular thing." And Congress was investigating. They were subpoenaing the director of the Secret Service to come and testify, who insisted that none of this had ever happened before. This was a superly weird aberration. And meanwhile, I have all these agents whispering in my ear going, "Oh no, let me tell you about a couple other times in Italy, in El Salvador. Let me tell you about what this supervisor did in Russia." The stories will make, your hair stand on end, and they made me really worried about why this culture existed. Like, why are they partying so hard? But along the way, again, so many of these agents were telling me about other things that were covered up, security failures that were a big deal, security failures like the president's house was shot at and the White House didn't figure it out. Forgive me, the Secret Service didn't figure it out for 4 days until a White House housekeeper found glass on the Truman balcony. They told me about a time when the agents that are supposed to protect sort of the launch pad of Marine One, on the South Lawn when the helicopter takes off, there are agents that are supposed to be patrolling that area to make sure there's nobody with a rocket launcher or some other weapon that could hurt the helicopter on liftoff. And that circular team had left because they were bizarrely helping protect a woman that the deputy director said was getting harassed in a domestic thing, and they were parked outside her house protecting her instead of the president's helicopter. Anyway, those kinds of stories that they told me one by one, I would write small stories about each of these. It took a long time to put them together, but with each one, I gained more trust of more agents who would then say, well, she got that right. Let me tell her this other thing.
What kind of person joins the Secret Service?
You know, for a long time, especially under President Kennedy, it was folks who had just come back from the war. So they were, infantrymen and soldiers and sometimes officers, veterans who cared about their country's national security and, were relatively young. Maybe they'd been grunts, but this was a great entry job for people that were that serious about protecting the country. Some people were motivated to become agents because Kennedy was killed. Kids watching television, little boys. I tell the story of one, and that's the reason he became an agent and eventually grew up to protect President Reagan. I think now it's so often a police officer in a local police department or a state highway patrolman who sort of rises to become the cream of the crop in his particular local pond and shines and sort of then graduates to, within a few years, a national security job like the Secret Service. You have to have a top secret security clearance to be a Secret Service agent. There's also a great pension and retirement program, which doesn't hurt.
But in theory, right? So these are people who were stars, who in many instances were alpha males, right? And when you think about sort of powerful people out there are businessmen and women who are driven by sort of money and power. And then there's those who have political power. But the Secret Service, these are hugely talented, powerful people, but who don't have names you recognize, who are in the room for massively important things, but can't actually tell anyone. So in some ways, is it a bit of a tortured agency?
I think you really hit on something important there, Stephanie, because it's true. There's not like a ton of money in becoming a Secret Service agent. They do well compared to some federal employees. There's not a lot of fame except for brush off fame, right? You were in the corner shot of President Reagan as he headed to a big speech. You were in the corner shot when Donald Trump was on a campaign rally and on the stage. You have the bragging rights with, I suppose, your family and friends that's what you do. But you're right, you don't get to talk about it. You don't get to tell anybody. In fact, agents who were protecting President Kennedy were warned by their supervisors, you're going to see a lot of stuff here, including the president with women, and you just can't tell anybody, not even your wife. So just package it away. And I think that's probably pretty hard. But your bigger point there is, it's a little bit of a torturous job. You are standing in stairwells for hours at a time, maybe all night.
You're saying no words.
No words. You're walking through if you're an advance agent, meaning preparing it for a trip somewhere, you're walking a convention center 20 times to make sure that every step the president takes is going to be secure. There's no line of sight from which someone can shoot him. I mean, pretty detailed OCD stuff. But again, it may draw that kind of person, like a person who might want to be a pilot. They're going to get every little detail right. And you are 3 steps from every historic moment this world will experience. I interviewed an agent who's now dead, unfortunately. He passed away while my book was in the course of being written. But I interviewed him, and he had been the person who prepared the security for President Kennedy's trip to Dallas. And it had tormented him that he was the first agent to lose a president. Just devastated. His name is Win Lawson. And in one of our interviews, I remember sort of chillingly him telling me, I would be sent down to like this ranch in Texas with Lyndon B. Johnson. It'd be cold. It'd be Christmas Eve. I'd be saying to myself, what in the world am I doing here? I'm paraphrasing you, Win. Gosh darn it, this is the worst job. And then I'd be on a plane to Cape Canaveral, standing for the first moonshot and watching it, and nobody else could even buy a ticket to this show. I'd be there, and I'd get to see it. So there is a little bit of romance in this job.
Are there complicated, difficult family lives? Because it's a job that truly lives are at stake, and you're putting country first, and you're freezing cold on Christmas Eve and you're not home.
It is no doubt broken up some marriages and tested many of them. I mean, overwhelmingly, this is a male agency, that. And the women who serve, and many of them that I've interviewed, have said that it's almost impossible to think about raising a family and being a Secret Service agent. Just so hard to do that. Some female agents are married to male agents and don't have children, which is pretty amazing, that kind of sacrifice. In addition, I mean, I've interviewed agents who missed being the best man at their friend's wedding because of an assignment that they couldn't switch out of. Secret Service officers, very rarely talked about, but they're the guys who are in uniform who guard the White House. They're part of the Secret Service too, and they're an essential part of it. For a while there, they could be called in on their off day every week. So it demands a lot. And in Kennedy's era anyway, there was a saying that the women of the agents, the wives of the agents, were married to the Secret Service because you had to give everything to them. You had to give everything to the protection of the president.
Then on some level, even though on one hand, we're totally surprised by these crazy scandals, but on the other hand, should we not be surprised at all? Because it's sort of this pressure cooker that, my God, 4 days in Cartagena, if anybody's going to blow it out, it's these people.
I mean, I don't want to give somebody a pass for living a double life on the road.
I'm not saying a pass, but should we not be so surprised?
No.
As we're talking about it, it kind of seems like, that's the most obvious thing.
No, I 100% agree. It feels weird to say, gee, this seems like a natural consequence, because it's a little far, but on the other hand, it is a pressure cooker, and they work so hard. And as one female agent told me, she's like, they've been partying hard since the 60s. This is an agency where going on a trip and being somewhere before the president arrives is the most relaxing moment you're going to have. He's not there yet. And when he leaves is the most relaxing moment. They call that wheels up, right? Air Force One's in the air. Phew, he's alive. Not our problem. So they party pretty hard and they work pretty hard. One agent I enjoyed, he worked and prepared the Clinton inauguration, helped in that inauguration. And he said he'd been up all night, something like up on his feet for 24, 27 hours. He said, I'd had so much coffee, my breath could take paint off a car. And I thought to myself, I think I know what you mean. I have seen them, put themselves through a physical regimen and rigor that I would crumple in. I think I'm physically fit and, healthy. I would never be able to do and withstand what they do.
Carol, you have been interviewing people, talking to sources for years and years. Is there something different about talking to people from the Secret Service? Did it seem almost, once you got them talking, cathartic, like they've been holding all this in for so long, right? Like, I'm just almost comparing it to, sources in Washington, they spend half their day on the phone leaking. Like, that's their jam. I mean, that's their career strategy, right? This is the opposite. So are they just right, like the buttons on their suits are bursting when you sit down, and the next thing you know, it's like, oh my God, Carol, put another pot of coffee on. Let's have a smoke. I got another story to tell you.
I mean, yes, in many ways, I think so. It was definitely.
Hey, this is a sexier book than people realize.
I think that it is, this is an all serious business. They are, putting their bodies between a bullet and the president. They're literally like Clint Hill, the day that he's clambering onto the back seat of the limo and Kennedy has been shot. His goal in clambering onto the back of that limo when he hears the first shot from Oswald is to put his body between the gunfire and the president. So it's dead serious work. I do think that some of these agents were ready to blow about how many secrets they'd kept and also how disappointed they were, right? This is the elite of the elite agency. That it has this noble tradition and well-earned reputation over decades of what it's willing to give and sacrifice, all the sacrifices that you and I have just been talking about. But when they see that their leadership is failing to give them the tools they need to do the job, letting their employees basically resign rather than stay the full term because they're so sick of working there. When they see all these security failures unfolding and their bosses trying to cover it up, including trying to cover it up from the president and the first lady, when they see that happening, it's hard for them to keep their silence. I think a lot of these people that spoke to me would have stayed honor bound, would not, to the oath that we will not talk to reporters without the permission of the director, which is the rule in the Secret Service, a painful rule. I think they would have done that had their leadership been looking out for them and making sure that the chinks in the armor of the Secret Service didn't become bigger and bigger. And they were becoming bigger and bigger from the years after 9/11. And it kind of the wheels came off under President Obama. It wasn't Obama's fault. It was he happened to be there at the time, but it was like after 9/11, all these federal dollars, billions of dollars, are getting shoved into anti-terror programs and huge agencies in the Department of Homeland Security that are going to protect us in the skies, that are going to protect our borders, going to keep truck bombs and fertilizer bombs and all this other stuff out of our country. We're going to prevent any other 9/11 or anything like it. But the Secret Service proportionally was this tiny little agency inside the behemoth that was the Department of Homeland Security. And they just got proportionally so little money. They were dealing with tools and technologies that were so outdated, and everybody else was getting all the fun new toys that actually were important to meet the 21st century threat. The service also was getting a huge decrease in the number of people protecting the White House and protecting the president. And budget cuts. Congress in 2010 had this great idea that they were going to cut the size of government, and they were going to do it kind of with a flat knife. Like, you're going to lose 2% this year, 2% next year, 2% the next year. And the result was nobody really thought about what the Secret Service couldn't do anymore as a result of those cuts. They kept trying to, it's an agency, alpha male DNA. They're always going to say, yes, sir, we can do it. But they couldn't.
So these cuts, these gaps, can you give us an example of how the agency failed to protect the president or the president's family because of this, right? Because oftentimes your average American, we start to tune out when we hear about the government needing bigger and bigger budgets, because we're like, you know what? When is the government ever going to get efficient like a business? The answer with government always like, we need more, we need more. And we don't hear many concrete examples of when you cut a budget, these are the things that happen. Can you give us an example of what's happened?
I'll give you two and I'm so glad you focus on it that way. This is a real simple one. Michelle Obama. She's kind of a rock star, unlike other first ladies. As popular as other first ladies were, Michelle Obama's popularity rivaled her husband's. She almost needed the same kind of protection and detail that he did. because people would swarm her in the streets. They're not trying to hurt her. It's just she'd be mobbed in a minute. Laura Bush could go to a bookstore in Manhattan and people would be gawking, but 3,000 people didn't all of a sudden show up and surround the store. That's the kind of person she was. Well, she took her kids one summer in 2010 to Disneyland in California. She's staying in the Beverly Hilton. I think that's right. And because the Secret Service didn't have enough people to stand in the entry and exits and the stairwells of the hotel, a strange man wandered in off the street, got on the stairwell, got into an elevator, and got up to her supposedly secure floor of her, sort of the presidential suite level of the hotel room, and got up to her door. Luckily there was an agent there who was guarding that door and put this stranger down on the ground. But it shouldn't be that we didn't have enough people in a stairwell, so a guy came within inches of the the First Lady's doorknob. Another example is this horrific security failure that caused a lot of consternation in the Secret Service. And that's September 2014, when a jumper, a guy with a disability, wearing plastic Crocs, a slight limp, makes it from a public sidewalk outside the White House into the White House in the residence and the East Room in 29 seconds.
How? In a pair of Crocs?
In a pair of Crocs with a limp.
I'm not kidding. Like when I wear a pair of Crocs, it's like I'm a human duck. Like I can't even get to the driveway quick. One's flying off a foot. Like, how did that even happen?
I mean, it's laughable and it's so tragic because every ring of security at the agency failed. But to your good question, like, what does an extra dollar mean? Well, the Secret Service had been losing staff. They were 280 people below staffing levels for protecting the White House. In other words, 280 less than they normally had. So their crew wasn't skeletal exactly that night, but it was full of people who were very junior and didn't know what to do. It was also because of that reduction of people, the service didn't have time to train people regularly. So new officers are coming on the line, but they don't know what exactly they're supposed to do and what the rules are. And so a brand new officer who hasn't been in the job for more than a few months is on the North Portico when a guy shows up and walks through the door. The officer from the Secret Service isn't completely sure, am I supposed to shoot him? Am I supposed to stand back? Am I supposed to block him? He's never trained for this before. A guy who was supposed to release the dog that would have stopped the jumper in his tracks and normally does stop all jumpers. He had a faulty radio and he was also trying to catch up talking to his wife because he'd worked so many days off. He'd been away from her for a ridiculous amount of time. And he's trying to arrange sort of their family life on his phone. He took out one earpiece that's supposed to be hearing, alerts on the campus. And he put in another, which was to hear his wife's conversation. And he missed that critical second, which was, jumper, everybody on deck. So budget cuts have an impact. Training, lack of people, lack of good equipment.
Is the divorce rate high?
There was a study, there haven't been good studies recently of this, but there was a study in the 1980s and the 1970s, and it found that the marriages stuck together, but they were strained. Secret Service agents, their wives stayed with them, but it was not always happy.
Did they talk about how they felt about specific presidents, who they liked working with, who they didn't? Right? You're putting your life on the line. You're putting almost all of your waking hours, and you certainly want to do it, yes, for your country, but for someone you respect who also respects you.
Totally. So the biggest love affair in the Secret Service that the agency has is with the George H.W. Bush, and maybe Reagan is tied for second. I think part of that is because President Bush and his son were extremely respectful. They kind of were like that wonderful combination of to the manor born. They were used to having help, and they treated the help like family, people who had lives, people who they should ask after them about their children and their wives or their husbands, respectful of their security instructions and advice. There's a famous story where President Bush the first interrupts a meeting with a group of fairly important VIPs who've come to visit him at the Oval. And he says, I have to leave. The Secret Service is calling. And when they call, I come. It's just that kind of respect. There were stresses, big stresses between the Secret Service and the Clintons, especially with Hillary Clinton. Agents weren't really in love with her, and she was not a fan of them. In the first few weeks of the Clinton presidency, a story leaked that she had an argument with her husband and thrown either a lamp or a ashtray at him in the argument. She believed that leak came from the Secret Service, which was still, very obviously enamored of the departing President Bush. The President Obama, the presidential detail agents that protect him thought he was a pretty great guy, but a lot of the agency, because they lean conservative, because there's still a decent amount of racism within every police force and is within this one, they were not big fans of his policies, his agenda, or him personally. It didn't mean that they protected him less, but they were a little cool to him. They loved Donald Trump as an agency. I'm not speaking for everyone in the agency. There are many who were very disheartened by the way he treated the Secret Service. But writ large, the agency was very supportive of his agenda, his get tough on crime rhetoric, his law and order, pronouncements. And they really crossed some red lines as an agency, political lines under Donald Trump's presidency.
Can you give us a clear example?
Donald Trump took over the Secret Service when it was trying to recover from all of those security gaffes and nightmares, trying to rebuild from the Obama years. But President Trump didn't care about governing. He looked at agencies as tools that he could use and deploy for, his own personal and political benefit. Now let me be clear. Every president uses the executive for their political gain, but it was just exceptionally acute with President Trump. The governing, the strategic mission, the problems of the agency, those weren't things he was going to address, attack, pay attention to. Under his leadership, the Secret Service agreed to help plan rallies while COVID was spiking. Under his leadership, the Secret Service helped forcibly remove peaceful protesters from Lafayette Square on June 1, probably one of the most iconic images of the authoritarianist streak of Donald Trump. Leadership of the Secret Service signed off on that idea, again, knowing full well that the Secret Service has a really long-standing pledge to protect the rights of the public to assemble and to protest their government. But in this case, they treated them quite differently. And finally, most frightening, and agents on the job were so upset about this, they sent me screenshots as proof at the time. But after January 6th, there were members of the president's detail and the protective division who were promoting the conspiracy theory that the election was rigged, that were promoting that Biden was not a legitimate president, and one Secret Service supervisor who said on her social media platform that the rioters on January 6th were patriots.
Then what's it like in the agency right now? I mean, those threats remain real as they did on January 5th.
Totally. Totally, they do. I mean, domestic extremism isn't going away, and the people who have stoked that lie that the election was stolen, I mean, they're they're pouring kerosene on this domestic extremism. People who are disappointed or angry for whatever reason, the economy left them behind. They think American government is elitist. Whatever their rancor, whatever their disappointment, this idea of a rigged election has become a rallying cry and a lightning rod, and it threatens a lot of violence. In the Secret Service, the director who was appointed by by President Trump, is the director today. And he is the person who allowed a Secret Service supervisor to serve as President Trump's White House Deputy Chief of Staff, a political role, a role helping the president burnish his political image, helping the president get reelected, helping the president plan his rallies. Totally a political job that the Secret Service never is supposed to wade into.
I know we're almost out of time, but I wanted to go back when you talked about sort of the strained relationship between the Clintons, Hillary Clinton and the Secret Service. Do you think any of that has to do with on members of the Secret Service's part resenting having to spend an awful lot of their time dealing with President Clinton and his relations with women? And do you think for Hillary Clinton, her knowing that, or her knowing how much they knew about who her husband was, do you think that was a contributing factor? If I was somebody in the Secret Service devoting my life to protecting the country, protecting the president, not with my family, and I was spending a whole lot of my time dealing with a president and his who knows what with whom, I think I'd be pretty annoyed too.
You know, this is really an important question because I think it shows a certain division in the Secret Service. That I like to ask you dirty questions. Sorry. I wasn't sure. You know, one thing that's a new revelation in my book is that agents who were assigned to candidate Clinton, so he's the Democratic nominee, he looks like he's going to win the presidency. According to the polls, he's coasting at this point toward the White House, and President Bush looks like he's going to lose. Remember, agents love President Bush. They don't want to see him go. Agents are assigned, of course, to protect every major presidential candidate. And Clinton is not only a presidential candidate, but a governor, and he looks like he's going to be president. These agents show up in Little Rock, and the revelation that I reveal is agents were shocked to find out that this routine that Governor Clinton had of jogging to the YMCA and then going inside for, either a steam or more gym workout or a shower they were told by their supervisor, actually him meeting women that were not his wife. And they were upset not because they were moralizing about Clinton, but they were upset because we're responsible for the security of the man on the other side of the door, and we can't control what's happening on the other side of the door. Their supervisors basically said, I'm sorry, we're not going to go in. And when they asked why, the supervisor said, because he's meeting a woman, give it up. So that was really frustrating. I think over time, as agents increasingly saw what President Clinton was up to. Lots of off-the-record movements, late at night, going places to various homes, townhouses, etc. They started to grow increasingly suspicious about what this is all about. And annoyed, definitely annoyed. But their bigger job is, we got to make sure the guy's alive. And they found that annoying because it was more stressful as he tried to keep people away for his privacy, as Mrs. Clinton tried to keep people away for her privacy. They're worried.
Their job's harder.
Their job, you're taking away their ability. It's no longer an embarrassment for a politician, a potential for a new fight with his wife. It's now a security issue where you're taking away the tools they need to do the job.
All right, I know we're out of time, but I have to ask you, what is not in the book? Because There had to be things, stories you loved that you wanted in there, but as you craft a book, they end up.
Yeah, this book was already too long. I mean, I think it reads pretty fast because there is a lot of excitement in it. And if you like either presidential history and like what it's really like inside the room, you'll probably like this book. There's a good bit of R-rated quality to it as well. Most of the things that I didn't include in the book were things in which I feared I would ruin someone's life by sharing what they had done and what had happened. And so as much as I'd like to tell you and readers generally about these incidents, I felt like it would be something they couldn't recover from. And
well, you do tell a lot. Are there people who are mad at you right now?
Yes, there have been people who have cussed me out pretty viciously. I was worried because the Secret Service Alumni Network also doesn't like this book. They feel that it harms the brand. It puts warts and it reveals those warts. They feel that
yes,
is.
But they created the warts. You just showed them to us.
Yes, and what I hope is that agents will get their wish. The agents who risked their careers, some of them losing their jobs, they want this alarm bell to be rung. They want the book to force President Biden and the next president, if necessary, to take a hard look at what their agency is failing to do and to shake up this sort of broken agency that is in demise, to fix it. And so I can take the hits. They don't have a voice. They're not legally, statutorily allowed to say their piece. So I will be willing to take it for them.
Well, you're taking the hit, and this book is a hit. Carol, thank you for sharing your time with me today. Thank you for sharing this book with us. It is an amazing book. It's an amazing summer read, and here we are in the month of June, so I highly recommend it. And thank you for letting me be part of this with you today.
Thank you for joining me. What a treat.
Great to see you. And thank you to everyone at the Strand.
Thank you so much, Carol, and thank you, Stephanie. That was such a interesting conversation.